What can the scientific method tell us about, say, the scientific method? Is this really a question that we should be asking that will be able to allow us to glean more information about what it is the scientific method's purpose is? Well, what is the scientific method in itself? Let's utilize the scientific method to understand the scientific method. So what is the scientific method composed of? Well, it's composed of a few different points, and those points being make observations. What do I see in nature? This can be anything from something you experience to thoughts you're having or something you read. And then after you make your observations, think of interesting questions. Why does that pattern occur? Why does this actually happen? What events are taking place which cause this to, become an actuality in my reality? And after you formulate your questions, or you come up with your questions, you formulate hypotheses. And as soon as you formulate a hypothesis, you are attempting to postulate what it is that is actually going on that is causing what it is that you're witnessing. So you say, what are the general causes of what it is that I'm seeing? And then you develop testable predictions. You have to test your hypothesis. And as you test your hypothesis, then you either come to conclusions and evidence which is in support of your hypothesis, or you can refine your hypothesis, you can alter it, you can expand on it, or in essence, you'll end up rejecting your hypothesis. And this comes from gathering the data that you gain through your experimentation, utilizing different variables which you can manipulate, and you can observe, and you can control. You have controls and you have variables that you utilize to see what really is going on. And then as a hypothesis gains credence among the general population and it is replicated, then it can be developed into a general theory. And then, it's a cycle. So what can this cycle tell us about itself? And is this really something which we might possibly be able to glean more information from? Well, let's look at other internal mechanisms which may cause some sort of external thing to present itself. So, as a matter of an example, my internal makeup and the mechanisms behind what it is that makes me me, through biology and genetics, in a lot of ways makes the reality in which I see, due to the fact that I'm merely a composition of ancestral data, and this ancestral data has a significant impact upon my placement here on planet Earth. So my internal makeup has a lot to do with the external reality that I live within. And so by understanding myself internally and my psychology and my behaviors, I'm much more able to actually identify myself and say, and come to conclusions and realizations as to why things are the way they are. So maybe by looking at the scientific method in this mannerism, then we can actually glean a little bit more information as to what it is that we're able to glean and understand from the scientific method itself. So what form of question should we ask? If we're following the scientific method, then let's apply the scientific method on the scientific method. So we observed the scientific method, we went through the entire cycle of it, and now we think of a question to pose against the scientific method. Is the scientific method a valid way to understand the natural world in which we observe? So that's the question, and then we'll formulate a hypothesis. The hypothesis being that the scientific method is a valid way to understand the natural world and natural law. That's our hypothesis. And then from that hypothesis, we experiment. Now, the experiments themselves have already been done, and the scientific method proves itself due to the fact that from the observations made, utilizing the scientific method, we understand the natural world. We understand the mechanisms involved, and in a way, we can influence nature. We can harness the power of nature and natural law, and we can manipulate it towards our own means. The greatest understanding that somebody can possibly express is through utilization of that which they're trying to understand. So in your actual action of applying the principles which you wish to understand is the greatest way in which you can express understanding. So the scientific method actually proves itself in this, because through utilization of the scientific method and this process, we've gained immense understanding of our surroundings and the natural world and natural law, things that make up the universe as we know it, and due to our understanding, we're able to manipulate things in a way to give ourselves outcomes which we desire. And now here is the tricky thing which presents a little bit of a paradox in this whole scientific method. Because if, in a way, the more I understand the natural world, the more I can influence it because I understand how it behaves, then how many of my observations are due to the fact that I'm actually influencing the world which I'm trying to observe? And this is a problem which a lot of scientists come across, and it's due to the innate bias of observation itself. I'm trying to observe something which I'm a part of. I'm trying to observe and understand the universe, but at the same time, I'm a part of the universe. And in no way can I be separate from it and try to understand it and observe it at the same time. I can't be a non-existent bystander with a wish to observe. That's not possible. There's always some sort of interaction between the observer and that which is being observed. So a form of bias presents itself, and scientists like to utilize double-blind techniques and significant figures and statistics to reduce the amount of influence that they have on the outcome which they're seeking questions and answers about and for. So that's how they overcome that whole hurdle and paradox where I'm trying to observe something that I'm a part of. How can I observe a system and say that its natural cause is something beyond my control when I'm a part of that system that I'm observing that's going on while I'm observing it? And this poses a much more deep and philosophical question that we, must answer. And that being that natural law is an observation of, the conditions that present themselves. Is reality merely the byproduct of natural law? And natural law, gives us all these other foundations for different facets of knowledge and science to grow upon. So, for example, all facets of knowledge in the terms of the scientific community are all interrelated with each other, right? I might be studying biology and chemistry, but it's due to the physics of the cosmic world which allows biological systems to actually organize and structure themselves in a way in which we can study. So in that sense, biological systems are related to systems of physics and so forth, and it's interrelated between all different mannerisms of facets of knowledge itself. So now we have to really try and, say, okay, well, if I'm a part of this system, obviously there's so much that I can manipulate, but there are certain fundamental things which I cannot manipulate themselves because they are what give us reality and nature as we know it. Now, here's another philosophical question you have to answer or ask yourself is, would it be possible to create a system which does not have the natural law or requirements or conditions that are presented within what we perceive to be reality? So, for example, what if we were to set up a simulation on a computer, and in this simulation, we actually give conditions which could prove viable for some form of life, but in no way does the natural law or conditions themselves relate at all to what we perceive and observe in our reality to be natural law. And this is actually a field of knowledge which is progressing fairly fast. And in a lot of ways, it presents itself in video games, where our whole entire universe is predicated upon things which we perceive to be natural law, but in these systems or in these simulations, they don't follow the same natural law which we perceive to be a universal law in our reality today. So let's say that we were to hypothetically create, in a sense, an entire universe, and we used, some sort of computer technology to actually simulate an entire existence of, everything from the cosmic down to the microcosmic. And we actually set up so that it didn't follow the same natural law or conditions that we perceive to be a universal law in our reality. Now, one could say that, well, life would never occur because life requires all of these set conditions to actually exist, which we determine to be natural law. Now, we can't necessarily jump to that conclusion because who's to say that a sense of life and what we perceive to be life can't proliferate in a place with an alternate set of conditions. And so if we were in that reality, if we were in that simulation, and we were to apply the scientific method, which has proven itself to be a means of observing reality and to come to conclusions and understandings of the mechanisms involved, which allows you to manipulate the natural law or the natural world that you perceive, if we were to apply the scientific method within this simulation that didn't follow the same law or natural law that we perceive in our reality, what would it show us? What would the scientific method show us in this simulation? Well, it would probably show us and give us some sense of understanding of the conditions or the natural law within that set simulation itself. So what this tells us is that the scientific method is a very useful means in making observations, coming to conclusions, and understanding your reality. However, what it tells us is that what we define as nature or the natural world, giving us a sense of life and reality as we know it, is something which is much more fluid and a dynamic structure rather than some rigid, innate thing which, is universally and also, in a sense, is transmitted between what we perceive to be a singular universe. Because if I was to create a universe within this one, which is only a simulation, but it does not follow the same laws and regulations which nature in our reality enforces, that doesn't make it less so. And now we find ourselves into a whole, well, which came first? I mean, if I was to create a universe within this universe, then it creates this whole line of thinking where it's like, wow, okay, for a universe to actually come into being, it was originally somewhere else before it was here. So if I was in the looking glass, so to speak, of our simulated universe, and I was looking out, and I was to say, well, did something come before what it was that I'm in now? And then I would have to come to the conclusion, yes, it actually did. And if I was to jump somehow from that universe into the one that we're in now, I could see and say, yes, I created this universe while I myself was within an original alternate universe. And I created this other simulation. But from the viewpoint of perception within the reality itself, you can't necessarily see where it was you came from. But conceptually, you can understand that for something to come about, it must have first been within something else. There must have been something else for it to be now. And so, again, going back to the whole scientific method, which is what this whole video is about, the scientific method proves to be a very efficient and effective way at observing the natural world around you. However, in application of, extensive knowledge and what it really means to be, somebody who can hypothetically create a simulated universe with a different set of conditions, which maybe these set conditions will actually give forth some sense of life, or some other pathway of life which finds a way, due to these conditions set forth, to actually harness and manipulate and capitalize and take advantage of the conditions within this system itself. And so what we're seeing here is that the natural world and what we perceive to be natural law isn't necessarily universally applicable between, hypothetical postulations of a simulated event where we could in fact create some sense of a universe which didn't follow, for example, the laws of gravity or of physics or of biology as we know it. And life in those systems, trying to gain a sense of reality, utilizing the scientific method, would come to alternate conclusions about natural law than what we perceive to be natural law in this waking reality we call life. So what that tells us is that the scientific method is a useful means at observing, understanding, applying, and then manipulating reality as we know it. But in no way does it define a sense of, some strict and all applicable natural law in which all things must ascertain to this natural law. The natural law that we perceive itself is something which is fluid and dynamic. So there you have it. What can we understand about the scientific method by applying the scientific method on itself? And that is what we see when we apply the scientific method on itself. And what we gain by going through this whole thought experiment that we call conceptualizing, visualizing, and of course adding in a little bit of a sense of adventure, exploration, with some big hypotheticals, postulations, and also a sense of imagination, which, if you don't have any of those things, then I advocate highly for you to go and find them, because with them you can experience much more than what you thought was once possible. And I thank you all for listening to this little video and demonstration, and I hope that you all have an amazing rest of your day, or if you're about to go to sleep, a great night. And thank you.